So let's give a warm welcome for Deanna Miller.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I think I felt like I got to sleep in a little bit this morning with a 10 o'clock start, so I'm enjoying that. Looks like we have a nice group today. Some of your faces I recognize from other programs, and some of you I do not, so it'll be a pleasure to get to know you. One of the nice things about today's presentation is I do need to stay near the camera, but I don't need to think about people outside of this room at satellite sites. So we're able to interact a little bit more than we have been in the past. So I'm looking forward to that. So it is a 2-hour session. And what I'd like to do for my own attention span purposes, as well as staying focused for your time and making sure that your time is honored, I'd like to travel through the material fairly steadily, not rushed, but fairly steadily, have some discussion on that. I'll give a lot of examples. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. I know that they say that the typical adult attention span is about 50 minutes, so we're going to challenge that a little bit today, but I hope to be dynamic and interesting enough to keep your attention. So if you'll stay focused, hopefully we'll stay on time today. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for that introduction. And as you can see, I put a couple of my little initials there, and as Dr. Thomas said, I'm also working on another degree, which is a master's degree in healthcare administration. And I like to share with persons why I've pursued that. Social work for me has been very fulfilling and satisfactory. However, I've noticed throughout my practice that in certain settings, especially in somewhat of a more medical model settings, residential care and things like that, that sometimes the social worker's influence, if you will, only kind of goes so far. And to me, obviously being very biased towards the social work perspective, is I feel that if social workers are able to take more administrative roles, that hopefully we can slowly change some of the culture of some of those medical models and hopefully make different settings and different services a little bit more person-centered. And so that's my mission that I'm on for my personal and professional career. And I hope that some of that shines through today as we discuss various topics. So welcome to the VCE. I've been to this location a number of times. I think it's a really nice location. It's easy to find and easy to get to. Not if you're not used to finding it, right? But once you find it, you kind of find it. I know that my GPS is programmed, and she tells me how to get here every time. So, as I mentioned, we're going to hold the questions to the end. Not that you can't maybe comment, or obviously when I ask for a little bit of a feedback when I'm describing something, that's an excellent time to just shout out something. But as far as an in-depth discussion, let's hold that to the end. There is a lot of material covered in the 2-hour period, and so I'm going to, like I said, I'll try to stay steady. You might want to use some of the paper that's provided in your folder to jot down some of the questions or thoughts that you might have. And then also, hopefully, one of the things that I try to do as I'm speaking is to think about questions you may have and try to address those. So. As far as goals and objectives today, I'm going to keep it a little bit loose, a little bit open, in that I want to increase your awareness. A lot of times when people hear the term gerontology, they're not really sure what that is about exactly. Is it people who study old people? Is it people who like to hang around with old people? What is all that gerontology stuff? So I'd like to frame that in a professional mode that'll hopefully grasp some of your interest and hold your attention as well. I'd like to offer some choices. I'd like for you to know what's available for persons in the community as far as resources, and then especially when we talk about some things like advanced directives. And then again, it's very similar, is not only increase your awareness, but then gain perspective on some of these choices, on some of the services, and how they may not only fit into your practice, but hopefully have you have I can't get my words out. Have an increased perspective on the fact that there are different choices, different people need different things, and unfortunately, here and now in our aging community, not everyone has equal access to some services, and so I'd like to challenge your thoughts on that and see what role you can play in the future in potentially changing that. Some of the font today is a little bit small, like this one, so I can fit everything on one page. I know that you have it with you. I know that that you all are able to read very nicely, but I will just overview some of what I have here. And the objectives today are to just overview session 1 very, very briefly. And so I'm not going to go backwards and spend a lot of time on it, but just remind you of some key points from session 1. Define the primary concern of most seniors is to understand options for maintaining independence as long as possible. So what I mean by that is that I have found in personal and professional experience, and some of you as well may have that professional and personal experience, is that most older adults, their main concern is, I want my independence. I want to know that I have choices. I don't want to be forced into anything. And even when things change and life changes and we all are faced with challenges, that persons are going to meet me where I'm at, if you will, that my care is going to remain person-centered so that I can maintain my independence, my sense of self in a setting that is person-centered and meets my needs. And I'm happy to say that I think we're finding more options than we used to 15, 20 years ago when I began this type of work. So in that, we're going to just define very briefly home health services, home help services, big difference there, senior low-income housing, assisted living, group homes, basic nursing care, and skilled nursing care. And just a quick show of hands, how many of you realize there's a difference between basic nursing home care, and skilled nursing home care? Okay, a few of you do. And so one of the things we'll talk about is how to navigate that system as well, because there are different opportunities, different funding sources for those types of care, and not everyone knows that or knows that there's different ways to access that. Involvement of hospice care and defined palliative care. A lot of persons interchange those words. Palliative care, hospice care, isn't that the same thing, Deanna? No, it's not the same thing, but it is similar. And if you will, some people see that as a progression from one to the other, and I'll explain that. The importance of advanced directives for everyone. And again, a simple show of hands. How many of you have advanced directives? Not as many hands as the previous question, and I'm not surprised. But my goal is obviously to remind you, as I remind myself, that those are important for each and every one of us, and that none of us are invincible. However, that because of human nature, and I think now that you understand and see the few hands shown, that we empathize with persons who don't have them, but yet we're going to remind ourselves how important they are and how really they're not that overwhelming or challenging, just a matter of a couple pieces of paper, okay? Really, trust me, they're not that bad. And again, the importance of these advanced directives for everyone, because when you have advanced directives, sometimes you're able to influence choices that are made about care decisions, care settings, things like that. If persons don't know your wishes for such things, then it leaves them at a quandary to make those decisions, a lot of times in a crisis mode. So we're going to talk about that as well. And as far as a conclusion, again, just reminding ourselves of the importance of making decisions, the importance of knowing what your choices are, and being able to educate others in their choices. Okay? So a brief review of Gerontology 101. Gerontology essentially is the study of aging. Okay? So when we talk about aging, we're talking about, obviously, most people right off the bat think of the biological changes, the physiological process, things shift. Things kind of don't stay where we want them to, if you will, with our sense of gravity. But also, it's a psychological process, isn't it? And one word I didn't include here, but I am a strong believer that it's a spiritual process in many ways as well. And so when we talk about theory of aging, for example, Erik Erikson's theory on aging, Abraham Maslow's theory on aging, spirituality plays a very key part in feeling good about aging, feeling at peace with some of the things that are present that we must think about as we age. I like to share a little information about myself throughout the presentation, and one of those things is I'm enjoying the last 3 weeks of being in my 30s. I will be turning 40 later this month. And so, in some people's mind, it's like, oh, you're just a child, and how could you talk about aging? But I have to say, and I have to say with pride, I think I've learned a lot in almost 40 years. And the more that I learn, the more that I experience aging, the more that I walk through processes with, for example, my parents and such, the more empathy, the more of a perspective I gain on this process. I have to admit, when I started my career, I graduated with a bachelor's of social work degree when I was 21, 22 years old. Really didn't know a lot about anything. Maybe some of you would agree with that. Because, I went to high school, I went to college, I was a good girl, I stayed focused, I got a bachelor's degree, and here I was ready to be a social worker, and I worked with persons who lived in long-term care facilities. And quite frankly, I didn't have a clue. But I also found that those were the persons that I fell in love with. Persons of age, persons who have experienced sometimes challenges. Their life challenges have taught me a lot about life in general. And so I do look forward to that and think that the more experience I gain, the better perspective I have. Again, some choose to focus on the negative aspects of aging, but to me, I think there's so much positive. Not just lower insurance rates or, things like that, but just, some of that overall maturity and wisdom that we gain. And I think it's very valuable. I read this little blurb once on something, and I've never forgotten it because it's so true. Aging is everyone's future. It's a little tricky, a little pun, kind of on words, kind of play on words types of things, but it's true. We're all aging. And as I segue into the next concept, because we're all aging and aging is everyone's future, think about your profession, your professional practice that you're engaged in. And isn't gerontological practice really becoming a specialty area, an area that we hear more and more about all the time? Gerontological social work, nursing. We hear about family practice physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners who have special training. Sometimes we hear the word geriatrician, and that's what that is, okay? Also skilled therapies like our physical therapists, our occupational therapists, our recreational therapists, speech, I hope I didn't forget anybody, music therapists, there's all kinds of them. And a lot of them that I've had the pleasure of meeting over the years are like myself, and that they found that when you have a love for older adults, you keep that. And it's exciting that our healthcare systems, our society, we're getting better. We're not quite probably there yet, but we're getting better on understanding and appreciating and honoring our older adults and realizing that our professional, evidence-based practice needs to adjust and cater to the needs of this special population. I also included psychiatry. Working in facilities, residential facilities like assisted livings, nursing homes and things like that. Also at one time I had the experience of being a case manager, a behavioral health case manager for an insurance company who worked with a Medicare Advantage program, and I went out and worked with people who were members and helped coordinate their mental health or their psychological health being under our program. And so I've had a lot of experience with psychiatrists and psychologists who also focus on older adults and would say they specialize in gerontology. And so these are very exciting fields. These are very exciting times for this practice area. Okay. Also in Gerontology 101, we talked a lot about statistics. I think I showed a little video clip about how many people, 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 12 or whatever, are going to be age 65 by such and such a year. And I'll review a little bit of that again in a minute. But the one thing that really always jumps out when we hear about those statistics, and the term that we always see over and over again, is baby boom. And again, a quick show of hands, how many of you are in the baby boom? So you were born between 1946 and 1964. Thank you. Okay. And so as we continue to hear that term and more generational diversity, how many of you heard that term? Generational diversity becomes a term that we're talking about. And saying that as the baby boom becomes people who are utilizing Social Security, who are utilizing Medicare, who are starting to think about estate planning, long-term care, so on and so forth, that the culture of these things is changing, is shifting because of the values, because of the different perspectives that the baby boom has brought to us. And I just caught Dr. Thomas out of the corner of my eye. Did I see your hand raised as a baby boomer? I thought so. Not that I'm making any assumptions about aging or anything, right? So post-World War II, 1946 through 1964. Well, as I shared with you earlier, if you did the math real quick, I wasn't around then, so I can't speak to it firsthand. But I know that with lots of study, and books and videos and things, but also talking and interacting with people, including my parents and one of my older siblings and some other folks, I do think that there's a very interesting perspective, a very interesting culture of that time. Things a person's experienced are very unique and different, even from what my generation or the generation, what is it, X, Y, Z, and all that stuff. The millennials, is that what they're calling some of the younger groups now that were born around the millennium? So the experience is very different. And this trend is going to affect things like healthcare, economics, housing, and many other areas of our society. And a couple things that I'm going to share with you are not necessarily biases one way or the other for myself, just simply observations that I've made. I have an idea that the medical marijuana is not going to go away anytime soon. And again, no, not necessarily being stereotypical, but sometimes, those things are based on fact, and we can laugh about them because we have to laugh at ourselves. Is that, many people would say that is the beginning of part of the baby boom's influence on healthcare, is to look at marijuana in its medicinal purposes. One of the other things, and like I said, I'll throw little tidbits out at you throughout the day that aren't included in the presentation, and write yourself a note if it's something you're interested in. But trends and things that we're studying, things that are surfacing in gerontological practice, are things like, did the baby boom era, especially those in the 60s and 70s, and the use of not only marijuana but other drugs, recreational drugs, does that impact the healthcare and the healthcare needs that we're going to see as this group ages? Okay, so if that's something that you're interested in, there's a great vast array of knowledge and studies that are being done on that. And when you look at dementia-specific practices, obviously brain changes, brain chemistry, there's a lot of data that's being gathered to say, well, that LSD and acid and some of that stuff really kind of took a toll on people. And it's amazing how the brain has changed over time. So again, those are just trends that you will see when you talk about baby boom or the certain amount of demographics. So here's a thought. We're not ready. We're not ready for the amount of people that are going to influence our healthcare systems, our economics, housing, and other areas of our society. We're not ready. What do I mean by that? Well, let's get some numbers, and then let's talk about that more. On July 1st, 2004, which has been a little bit a while ago, but let's put it in perspective as we're kind of in the middle of this. So we start with July 2004, and 12% of all Americans were 65 or older. By 2050, okay, so it's a little bit longer. Here, let me draw that for you. I think sometimes when we visualize things, it helps. 2004 and 2050. So we're about here, right? So basically what's going to happen is these numbers are going to go like that. And this is data according to the U.S. Census Bureau. 21% of the U.S. population in 2050 will be over 65, okay? And even though that looks like a big curve, 12 to 20, you think, well, Deanna, 12 to 20 might not be that big. But the thing that we forget about too is that what's going on with our Social Security, what's going on with our health care, what's going on with all that. When you talk about a 9% increase, 9% of how many million people in that group, okay? 36.3 million, the number of people 65 and over in the U.S. on July 1, 2004, which is that 12%. And this group accounts for 12% of the U.S. population. So, between 2003 and 2004, 351,000 people moved into this age group. That's like the size of an entire city of Detroit. That's big, right? So when you think about your practice, think about those numbers. If that's 12% and we're going to go up to 20%, what is that going to look like? And don't ask me because I'm not good at math. That's why I'm a social worker. 86.7 million. Projected number of people 65 and over in the year 2050, which we just talked about. So there's your 86.7 million. 21% of the entire population. 147% is a projected percentage increase in the 65 and older population. So think about it in those terms. If we took a sampling of this room, we might have, we had maybe 6 or 8 baby boomers here. By that time, almost the whole room will be persons 65 and older. By comparison, the population as a whole would have increased only by 49% over the same period. So 147% are going to be is the percentage of people over 65 comparatively to 49 overall. It's huge, huge. And some of you are saying, well, gosh, 2050, I might not even be around, Well, but you're around now. And you're here to help us get prepared for what's going to come. Our elders are more diverse than ever before. Would you agree with that statement? Not just ethnicity, not just culture, but all types of areas. Economically, socioeconomically. The rights that people enjoy that they didn't enjoy 100, even 50 years ago. I have to share with you that, the year 2011, again, putting my life course into perspective, that I didn't live through segregation. I didn't live through, some of these things that happened in our society, but studying them and looking back on them and talking with elders who have lived through experiences of such items that, 50 years ago, only 50 years ago in our nation, some of the everyday laws and practices were horrifically discriminatory to most of our population. Think how far we've come in 50 years. Now, obviously, we could all argue that we have quite a ways to go in a lot of areas as well. But if we look at how far we've come, and then we also look at the fact that in 40 years from now, we're going to have 147% increase in older adults, those older adults are going to look a lot different than the older adults that we're practicing with today. And I'm excited. So of these older persons that we're talking about, and again, some of us are always talking about those people because that's not us. And then some of us are realizing we're getting closer to being them, the them and us syndrome. 4.6 million of people age 65 and older are employed. Is that surprising to you? Okay. This amounts to 13% of all the people in this age group. Now, they're all not just Walmart greeters either, are they? They're all not the lunch lady that bakes cookies at the elementary school. There's people 65 and older still working the lines, still farming, still doing some of the things that they've done their entire life. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, isn't there? Some of it is beautiful. It's wonderful. They've stayed healthy. Our healthcare technology, we're able to live longer and be healthier longer. And then the other part of it is that people have to work longer. And we're going to talk more about economics in just a little bit. 77% is the proportion of people aged 65 to 69 who graduated from high school. And I can say in my practice over the years when I would interview folks, and those wonderful psychosocials, we call them, what is your education, what was your occupation, all that good stuff. That I used to hear a lot of 8th grade, 6th grade, 5th grade, a lot of, I had to work on the farm, I had to go into the shop or whatever because, I had to support the family. And more we're hearing that older adults have graduated high school. So that gives us perspective on literacy, gives us perspective on senses of accomplishment and overall values. 73% of people ages 70 to 74 and 68% of those 75 and over are also high school graduates. Okay? So we're becoming a better educated, more literate society. 20% is the percent of the population age 65 to 69 who have a bachelor's degree or higher. And among people ages 70 to 74, 19% have achieved this level of education. For those 75 and older, 15% are college graduates. And what I'm saying again with all that is it's not only are we seeing more persons who are high school graduates, but college graduates. And then the last number here is 73,000 older adults. This is 2002, so this is 10 years ago. This is probably significantly higher. Number of persons over 65 who are enrolled in college. Does anyone know or fit that criteria? Okay. Because we're on our second career. Maybe we've retired from something that we kind of had to do, and now we're doing what we enjoy. Maybe we didn't have the opportunity of education because we couldn't access certain financial aid, or we were raising children or doing other things at that time. And so it's wonderful to have those opportunities. And again, how does that impact the future of healthcare, the future of economics? Well, I can tell you one thing. You can't hardly walk into even a long-term care facility. When people think about nursing homes, they think about all these wheelchairs lined up, right? And people sitting there drooling and sleeping and nothing going on. No, you can't walk into a facility nowadays and there's not Wi-Fi. There's, people are on Facebook. People are getting emails. There's computers everywhere, okay? And so that's only going to continue to change. And so not only do we think about the typical interview of a person, the typical assessment of a person, but we need to think about technology and how that can help us with our practice in the future. And the fact is, some people prefer to text, prefer to email over conversation. Some of us like that, some of us don't, but that is one of the things that we're going to have to work and deal with in the future. So let's talk about income and wealth. Again, I think a lot of people have stereotypes of older adults. 108,885 dollars. A lot of money. Median net worth in 2000, in the year 2000, of households with householders 65 and older. We think, well, gosh, that sounds pretty good, Deanna. If most persons 65 and older have a net worth of 108,000, any idea where that net worth lies, though? In their home, in their real estate, in their property. And we're going to talk about what's happening with that. As if I need to tell all of you, but we'll talk about it anyways. Now let's think about this number, though. $23,787. The median income in 2003 of households with householders 65 and older. So statistically unchanged in real terms from the previous year. So that number was holding steady. But think about $23,787. That's annual, let's say that's your annual salary. Is that a lot of money? So the thing about numbers, the thing about wealth and perspective, this is our perspective it's how you look at it, right? So on one hand, if you take into account person's property, we think, well, those older people, they're pretty well set. They don't need all these increases in Social Security, and they don't have to worry about the things we have to worry about. But then also knowing, though, that's only if you include the real estate worth, which we know what's happened to that, but that the reality is a good majority of folks are at $23,000 or less. That makes it hard to pay taxes, phone bills, groceries, prescriptions, over-the-counter, non-covered medical expenses. So in 2003, the poverty rate of persons 65 and older was 10.2%. Well, Deanna, that doesn't sound that bad. 10% of the 12%? Did you catch that? Remember that 12% I talked about earlier? We're talking about 10% of the 12%. Which leads me to this thing. Of our seniors, 65% of them vote, or at least are registered voters. 72% of people ages 65 to 74 voted in the year 2000 presidential election. People have influence, and don't think for a minute that politicians don't know that. That's why we hear platform after platform on Medicare, Social Security, healthcare reform. But I challenge you to think about what is on the platform and what actually happens. People come out to vote, they vote for something that they think sounds good. For example, if I stood in my platform was that most seniors have a median income of $108,000. Isn't that fantastic? That's going to influence a certain pool of voters. That's going to influence people to think about taxes, wealth protection, things like that. But if I stand and say 10% of our elders are living with $23,000 a year or less, that changes the perspective too, doesn't it? Okay? So the thing that we know about statistics, politics, presentations of data is that you've got to dig deeper, because people can present data in various ways. And I'm going to share something with you that I found extremely interesting that I never knew until this, and we're going to jump ahead just for a second just because I got on a tangent here, sorry. We'll come back. Not that we're going to skip the veterans at all because they're very important, but let's just talk about poverty while we're on that tangent. Obviously, this is something I like to talk about. The original poverty line was first determined at the onset of the War on Poverty in 1964. Okay? Sounds good, right? Calculated by determining the cheapest possible way to purchase the least amount of food a person would need to stay alive. This is the wording, stay alive, for a short period. Oh, that's a typo. Then multiplying that by 3. The official federal poverty line, established in 1964, is, another typo, my goodness, I must have been tired when I was doing this, is corrected annually for inflation. Well, that sounds good, right? Does anybody know much about inflation and how that's calculated? Okay, I'm going to tell you. It does not take into account regional factors or special diets. Does it cost more to eat healthy or to eat junk? It costs a lot more to eat healthy, doesn't it? Okay. And depending on a region, depending on your accessibility to a market, a fruit market, a vegetable market, a grocery store, what do people end up eating? Junk. Okay. Not only that, but if you're an older adult, what's easier to cook? What's easier to handle? What's easier to store? The junk. Okay. Compared demographically to retired people in middle and upper income categories, low-income seniors can be characterized, and that's a tricky statement, by they rent rather than own. Would you agree? A lot of times they live in public housing versus private housing, live in neighborhoods described as poor or fair, as far as safety, lighting, handicap accessibility, things like that. Safety is a big one. Most low-income older adults are widowed and women, less educated, little savings, lower rates of life satisfaction, and chronic illnesses either have changed everything in their life or will change everything in their life. So let's stop and identify some of these factors. The dream, the mirage, the public campaign that you see of the beautiful silver-haired, healthy, vibrant, Viagra-taking, couple on television. That's wonderful, and that's something to strive for as we age, to be healthy, to be happy, to be active. But is that the reality of especially the people that we serve? And is that going to be the reality of those millions of older adults that are coming our way? Probably not. This is the reality of what we have now, and this is what we need to think about how we can work better with in the future. I rent versus own. So that whole $108,000 net worth thing, forget about it, okay? Maybe if you live in a suburb, maybe if you fall into a certain category. But the other thing is how many of the persons, especially, and I like to speak to this region of the state a little bit if I can, and I'm not probably as eloquent on it as all of you who may be from this area, because I'm not. But, think about those people who had pensions, who did have security, who worked hard. And where are those investments going? Where's that pension going? So I rent rather than own. I live in public housing versus private housing. And the neighborhoods that I live in are described as poor or fair. Now, it's going to be curious to see. We all know that women, you typically live longer. But that is one of those things that is slowly starting to change a little bit. Is it because men are living longer? Or is it because women are not living as long as men? Again, a play on words, isn't it? Is it that women are continuing to live longer, or that women are not living as long as men? Or, no, wait a minute, you know what I mean. See, I got myself tripped up. Men would typically live, 72, let's just throw that number out there. Women would typically live 80. Well, women are in the workforce. Women are under stress. Women are obese. Women are having heart disease. Okay? So the men and the women are catching up a little bit. At the same time, though, everyone's living a little bit longer because we have better technology, better health care. How does that impact our practice when we think about working with older adults, especially older adults who are struggling with housing, health care, maybe have less education, are widowed? When we focus on women's health and women's perspective on economics and housing, it may be a slightly different perspective than a man's perspective. I see some heads saying yes. I see some people, I don't know if they're sleeping or they're, oh, there she is. I don't know. What do you think? Is it really that big of a deal? Do men and women really age differently? What do you think, sir?
The life, depending on their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. How about the perspective, though, of asking for help? How about the perspective of utilizing services? Okay? That's a very different dynamic based on gender, and so those are things to consider as well. So the impacts of poverty. Continuing on with this, how they calculate this poverty line thing, I can't seem to let go of this. It just blew me away. Food prices have been kept artificially low by federal agricultural subsidies. What does that mean? Believe it or not, if we paid the wholesale price for food based on what the farmers have to put into work and labor and supplies and equipment, without the federal subsidies, the price of food would be even higher than it is. And what do we know? We already hear, right? We're in the first part of August, but what are we already hearing about what's going to happen to our groceries come fall and winter this year because of the drought? And you think we're going to have it bad in Michigan. What if you live in the plains? What if you live in some of those areas? Okay? So food prices is what, remember, the poverty line was based on food. Enough food for someone to stay alive. Remember that wording, I love that. So we know that actual food prices are lower because of the agricultural subsidies, which don't we always hear about those being threatened? We always hear about there might not be money for that. Recent studies show that poor people now spend 1/6 of their income on food, not the 1/3 as previously calculated. So that's how they took that number and then they multiply it by 3. Well, now what we're saying is just simply inflation and everything else, also knowing that technically if those subsidies went away, what would happen to the price of food? Okay, that 1/3 doesn't even begin to meet a person's needs for adequate nutrition. That number's not changing. That archaic, if you will, calculation is not only food, but it's housing, medical care, and transportation. When gas is $4 a gallon, how is that different calculating a poverty limit when gas in 1964 was, I don't know, 65 cents, 70 cents? Anybody that feels like they know? I know in the 80s and 90s when I first started driving, it was like 95 cents a gallon. So, $4 a gallon. And here's another thought. What about poverty of our younger Americans? We're talking about older Americans. We're talking about our seniors living in poverty. But how many people are younger living in poverty? Does anybody know what those numbers are doing? How does that affect all of us? Anybody? Thank you. The crowded nest. Remember that empty nest where kids went off to college, they went off and got married, they went off and did things, and the parents had an empty nest, and then they focused on RVing and retiring and spending that disposable income that we all think that they have lots of. Now, the families are extended. Families are staying together, moving together, taking care of each other because of jobs, because of poverty, because of education, because of these types of things. Not only that, and again, I'm a social worker primarily, I'm studying administration, so I know a little bit about economics, but I'm going to keep it simple. If persons are in poverty, are they paying into the tax base? If they're utilizing services and not pushing tax dollars into the systems, what's going to happen? I mean, we're already talking about there's not enough Social Security, there's Medicare, we can't afford it. The states are fighting with the federal government about Medicaid, who's going to pay, who can't pay. How are the states going to be creative in getting that? This is right now. What's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years from now, the rate we're going? In the readings and in the things that I've gathered for this presentation, I saw this term a couple times. Greedy geezers. Have you ever heard that? What that is saying is that there's a perception that most elders have, hey, they have Social Security, they have pensions, they don't have to work, their houses are paid for, they got it easy street. And they just want more and more and more. They want that senior citizen discount. They want their their income protected with tax. They don't want to have to pay school millages. These greedy geezers. That's a very real perception. And I hope the numbers that I shared with you today, even though I agree numbers can be influenced, those are real numbers. Those are based on the U.S. Census. That definition of the U.S., the federal poverty level, look it up. It's there. When we talk about aging and things like that, these are values, right? These are stereotypes. These are beliefs. This is how, what is that saying? What you believe and what you speak and how you act, it's all connected. If you are getting information about greedy geezers and you believe that, then you're not necessarily going to think about people living in poverty, living in poor neighborhoods, not being able to afford their medications or groceries, things like that. The other thing that's very striking about statistics and what's happening with our aging and our economics is this concept called negative inheritance. Has anyone heard of that? No? It's a fairly new term, but you'll see a lot. Like if you pull up articles in the Wall Street Journal of Finance, or if you're looking at elder law, if you're looking at investments, I Googled a few things to see what I found out there. So we've got lots of elder law attorneys using this word to say, avoid negative inheritance. Don't leave your children your bills. So when we think about values, again, we think about very strong things that we've grown up learning. And many of us right now, I would honestly say, if I could, I would like to leave not only a legacy of my personhood and values and whatever, but I would like to leave a financial cushion for my own expenses and perhaps a little extra for the persons I love. I think we're all kind of programmed that way, aren't we? That's a good thing to do. That's a responsible thing to do. And many of our seniors, many of the greatest generation, were able to do that. And in fact, a lot of baby boomers are now living on the funds that their parents left them as inheritance. But in turn, how much are the baby boomers leaving behind for their children? And this isn't a blaming game, okay? This isn't saying, oh, you old pot-smoking hippies, you spent all the money. I'm not saying that. Because that's a stereotype of baby boom, isn't it? I'm not saying that. We're going to talk more about what factors have contributed to the fact that there's not the money there. The real estate, the wealth, the old money is not there, okay? And so not only are adults caring for their older parents, they're also caring for children. And what do we call that? The sandwich generation, right? Or the sandwich, being, in a sandwich caregiving situation. And so the adults caring for their parents are realizing that with the cost of care, with what the parents didn't save, what real estate's no longer worth, et cetera, they're actually having to fit some of the bill. Okay? And so this is a very overwhelming, a very sad, if you will, experience that is impacting how people feel about aging, how they feel about older adults. It's creating the feeling of burden. And we need to do something about it. Let's just go back quickly. I got on that poverty thing and I couldn't get myself off it. Talk about values. Talk about we should be ashamed of how we treat our elders at times. Think about our veterans. 9.7 million people over 65 are military veterans. In Michigan, veterans may be entitled to services at hospitals, clinics, and cemeteries, meaning if they have a health care problem, an acute problem, a chronic problem, there's clinics in certain communities, there's VA hospitals, and also there's cemeteries that are designated for veterans to have proper burial, to be honored in those ways. And that website that's there is an excellent resource, by the way, that will tell you every veterans clinic, etc., in the state of Michigan. So they're entitled to different services. Does anybody have a first-hand account of those services? How they work, how accessible they are, the quality of care? Okay.
Unless something triggers a psychologist, a social worker, or some other helping profession that can come in and push the documents through. Otherwise, it's like old DHS 224 numbers. You call this number, then you call that
Okay? And I'm going to repeat some of what you said, paraphrase for the recording and then my understanding of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. That there are services. In fact, I'll jump to the next line there, that there's also benefits for nursing homes and even in-home care, but how do you get them? Okay? And again, I'm giving you 2 websites because all of you are very computer savvy, I'm sure, but are those seniors computer savvy? And what happens, like our friend pointed out, what happens when you get on that telephone, once you figure out which 1-800 number it is, and you get on the phone and push this and do this and you know, this and that type. The term discourage utilization, I use that often, the term I've learned recently. Also, when we get talking about the Department of Human Services and some of their services and access and phone lines. And again, this isn't blaming. These are huge systems. But we have to be aware of the challenges. If we're not aware and we're not willing to discuss the challenges, they're not going to go away. Okay? So the reality is the veteran services are difficult. They're overwhelming for a lot of folks. And again, like what you were saying, not a lot of people who are even helping professionals like myself who are stationed in facilities or clinics, whatever, know even how to access those services. Because the whole veterans concept has been something that was them and not us. It's now becoming back to us because we have Iraq and Afghanistan and some of that stuff. But even that's different than the services that our older adults use, okay? And so it's very imperative that we become more aware of what's available for our veterans and how to utilize those services. And I can tell you that most of the time when you do reach a person, they're very helpful. But I don't know about you, but I can barely keep track of my pay stub from one pay period to the other. Do you have your discharge papers? Do you have this? Do you have that? There's a lot that goes into that. And if you don't have those papers, you're pretty much on hold until you can produce those papers. You know, and especially think about if you're a spouse, you know, especially a lot of the women whose husbands were veterans. Maybe they kind of knew where he kept that, but that was kind of his thing or whatever. Or, you know, he passed, and now financially things have changed. I don't have the income, I don't have the resources. I didn't realize some of the debt that we had. And so I'm being told, well, you know, your husband was a veteran, you can get help. Well, I don't know what company or branch or, you know, I don't know all that stuff, and I don't even know where to find it. Okay, so there's a lot of challenges to that. Again, a lot of people, when they think of the greedy geezers, they think, oh, they just have it made. They have veterans benefits, they have Social Security, they have all these pensions. It's not that simple, okay? One thing that is available to veterans, and some of you might be familiar with this, is something called aid and attendance benefits, okay? It's additional income for dependent care of a veteran or their spouse. Now, a couple things that I didn't include there, because I want to tell you, because that way you have to pay attention, see? You can't just take the paper home and look at it later. Is that it's based on assets. So some seniors have too much assets, too much income to qualify for these benefits, okay? Which is kind of scary when you think about the typical cost of a nurse's aide or a home health aide to bring one in your home and care for someone. Typically, any idea how much that costs per hour? $15 to $25 an hour. So I might get a pretty good Social Security. Maybe I get $1,500, $1,700 a month. And I might get a little bit of veterans benefit from my husband, or I might get a little bit of pension from his or my job. But the reality is, if I'm considered to have too many assets, we're not taking into account that I have to pay caregivers for my care. Not only that, but we're still paying taxes, we're still paying utilities, we're still paying. I don't know about you. How many people have a landline anymore? A landline phone? How much does it cost? It's outrageous. Anywhere between $40 to $100 a month just for a telephone. And if your income is limited, you only get X amount, X $100, and there's a lot of seniors that are functioning under $1,000 a month or less. $100 a month for a telephone, that's huge. Huge. So aid and attendance benefit, it can help with things like nursing home care, assisted living, respite, caregivers. However, again, there's lots of hoops to jump through, and there's lots of things you need to know about it. A big thing you need to know about it is that, do you know that if you're applying for Medicaid, now you have to apply for veterans, make sure that there's no veterans benefits. We have to rule that out, right? You know, you have to rule out assets, you have to rule out face cash value of insurance, you have to rule out, various things. Now it's required that you have to make sure that you're not entitled to veterans benefits for yourself or spouse when you're applying for Medicaid. So there's one more thing that's going to keep you from potentially getting services. A lot of veterans will use elder law resources when they're looking for assistance with aid and attendance and Medicaid because of the paper trail, because of how overwhelming it is. So elder law resources are good for estate planning, for applying for Medicaid, also for assisting with advanced directives. We're going to talk about advanced directives more. Yes.
Just one thing about elder law. Everybody needs to know that each one of the counties has a specific group of attorneys that particularly deal with all of that business. Wayne County uniquely has one in Redford that is, I think, the first Tuesdays of each month. It is free. They do it all, every stitch of it. And UFB's law clinic does a portion of it as well for free.
Did you say the VA law clinic?
Yeah, all of it.
Okay.
They do the whole.
Okay.
The aid and attendance has a special group.
Yep.
I think his name is Batel. I'll send that link to you to share with everybody. And they will do the whole paper thing. But the catch is that you have to know that that's available.
Right.
If you don't know it's available, how do you know?
Right. So as we're talking about elder law resources, there's also the awareness that it's not just hiring someone for $200 an hour. It's legal aid. It's some of these other outreach programs. Okay, so that's good to know. It was already mentioned, and I'm going to mention it again. A resource here for PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, one of you mentioned it perfectly too. This is one of those things that keeps people from utilizing services because of stigma, because of fear. Okay. So we talked about veterans some. We talked about poverty. Okay. So let's take a second and reframe, put everything into perspective. Get back on track from Deanna's tangent. Gerontology focuses on aging. Aging individuals have a number of challenges. Again, biologically, physiologically, psychology, and finance. And finance is a big one because it's so complicated, okay? Again, when we think about the greedy geezers or we think about the number of adults, older adults living in poverty, we think, well, but what happened to these safety nets? What happened to the things we learned about when we were in, social work school or whatever? We learned about Social Security, pensions, personal savings. This is often referred to as a three-legged stool. Naive people, younger people think, well, when I can retire and I'll get Social Security and I'll be fine. No. Social Security is generally not enough for persons to pay their expenses. And what do we know about Social Security? If we're paying any attention at all to our national issues, what is going on with Social Security? It's a pot of money that has been put into, but it's also been taken out of, okay? And there's been various executive orders that said we need to take X amount of dollars out of Social Security because we have to fight the Cold War, as one example. Because if we don't fight off those darn Russians, that we're going to actually realize are people that we can talk to next month. If we don't protect our nation and pay for our defense, we might not be here to worry about Social Security. So that sounds rational, doesn't it? But you know what? That money never came back. And when we talked about, and here's my drawing again, when we talked about earlier, the amount of persons, the younger persons, the workforce, the contributors to Social Security, how is that percentage coming out when most of those persons are living in poverty? And I hope you can hear me. Yep, good, my microphone's working. Sorry, my dyslexia here. When we think about Social Security, it was designed as a system like this, okay? It was designed that there was all of us working, producing, contributing to a smaller amount of older adults who needed support, who deserved it, who worked for it, who deserved Social Security benefits, who deserved Medicare, those types of things. So we're all working, we're all putting into it. But when the demographics are changing and the economics are changing, and there's more of them than there are us, and the us are barely keeping going ourselves, we're not putting into that. Okay? So between just simple proportion, numbers and theory, and the fact of what's even happening to these items listed on the three-legged stool. So the Social Security may not be there much longer. Pensions, I don't know about you, but I'm just always looking for jobs. Always looking for something better. It's just, I think that's, again, a generational thing. And how many of those jobs offer pensions anymore? And not to toot my own horn, but I'm a fairly educated, resourceful person. And to find a job with a pension can be a challenge. Yes, one more comment.
Just real quick, the Social Security thing, I was in a legislative meeting, and I didn't realize when I said it that it created what it did. But I was just thinking, always thinking. And I said, so why are we having so much problem with Social Security? When someone transitions to their next life, whatever you want to call it, deceased or whatever, what happens with that money? Because it's been paid in. What happens to the money that you sent out? Did you collect it back? Where is the rest of it? What happens to the money that people who were drawing on their Social Security but have paid into it for years, so there's still money there, but they've deceased? Where's that money? And the whole, I've never seen legislators do this. First, they stared at me like, who the hell am I? And then there was really no answer. The whole room went so quiet you could hear a pin fall on cotton. But I think it's a valid question. Where is that money? And what are you doing with it?
Mm-hmm.
So all of this hoo-ha about Social Security, I have some misgivings and some concerns about why are we having this problem with this upside down depositing when it's money that just sits there allegedly that people paid into, but where is it? They're not accounting for that. We need to make them accountable.
Mm-hmm. So as she shared with us, there's not only the issues we're talking about, but there's when persons pass on or when there's supplements, whatever, what happened to that money? And so obviously in frames of that, it's utilization. How's that money been spent? Whether it was spent on defense, and whether you agree with that or not, whether it's been pulled out or mishandled, again, some people would say, well, that's big government. The other thing is that when the war on poverty was taking place, and then all these programs started with the Great Society, remember those sociological terms? The life expectancy at that time was probably what? 70, maybe 72? Or lower even? So what we thought is people are going to get Social Security and Medicare at 65, but they're only going to use it for a few years. When they're the most debilitated, it's a safety net, right? It's going to get people through. How long are people using it now? Life expectancies, 80, 90, etc. And again, I'm not saying that's not a beautiful thing, that people can live longer, but it's economics. Okay? That's why we're in some of the trouble that we're in. That's why these resources are not here. That's why the number of people in poverty goes up and up and up. And what I wanted to point out by that little theory or that description of what poverty means is, if that poverty level was accurate, what would that number really be like? If I can stand here and say, yes, in the last, 8 years of my administration, poverty's went down. Well, that's because the calculation is from 1965. That's because we're not talking about $4 a gallon in gas. We're not talking about the fact that, a telephone for your house is $70 a month. That a gallon of milk is $3. Okay? So our voices need to be heard. Our awareness needs to be made that these are not issues that are going to go away. Again, pensions. What's happening even if you did gain a pension? It can be taken away from you. It can be reduced. I was just hearing about a teachers union that was talking about their pensions are being reduced. Okay? Personal savings. And again, we're talking about values. We're talking about, things that change over time. I don't know about you, but I am probably not very financially responsible. I admit it. I'm not. I was listening to, I think I've shared with you before, I'm an NPR freak. I love NPR. And I was listening on the way over here to a discussion about people who live in 100 square feet or less. Does anybody know how big 100 square feet is? It's about the size of what? Maybe this seating section right here? Okay. My house has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a 2-car garage. Do I need all that? Do I need a pair of sandals that goes with every outfit that I can think of from Sunday to sundown? We haven't had to save, though. It's been okay. We had this mirage, and I did. I thought, you know what? I'm going to be a good girl. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a good job. And somewhere along the line, in my 30s and 40s and 50s, I'll have money. Well, like I said, I'll be 40 here real quick. And student loan, mortgage. Okay? We have to start thinking differently. Again, the greatest generation, it was a huge source of pride. And it was pretty much expected that you would leave your family a significant amount of wealth. Now, not only is it as strong as a value, but it's like, my kids, they're not getting anything. I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm living longer. I'm living happier. I'm more active. I'm going to have a condo on each coast. It's not just the kids. It's not just the young kids buying video games. It's all of us. We've got to start thinking differently about this. And the reality is, the personal savings of the baby boom, of all those numbers, all those millions I talked to you about, it's not there. It's credit. Okay? So, kind of overwhelming, feeling kind of like, wow. I don't know if aging's really something to look forward to, do you know? You stood here and said that it's wonderful, and it's beautiful, and it's going to be a spiritual thing. Right now, I'm not very inspired. Well, let's talk about it. As we get older, we think about reflection, don't we? Think about where we've been, where we're going. Think about others more than ourselves, a little bit more, hopefully. Maslow's theory says that as needs are presented in a hierarchy, and in order to move from one level to the next, the lower level must be met. And there's a lot to this theory that makes a lot of sense. Physiologically, psychologically, biologically. But in some ways, we have become very egocentric when it comes to these things. In thinking that, well, yes, I have to have food and water and warmth, and I'm entitled to that. And if I don't seem to know how to find it or produce it, somebody should give it to me, take care of it for me. Safety needs, safety, security. Yeah, I need a nice home. I need a place to rest my head and things like that. And, I need 2,700 square feet to do it. Belongingness and love, our intimate relationships, our friendships, they're very important. I absolutely believe that they are a basic psychological need. Our self-esteem, our sense of feeling of accomplishment, of prestige. If I can't feed myself, if I can't take care of myself, I'm not going to have very good self-esteem. Remember earlier when I was sharing with you those statistics and those things about older adults living in poverty. A huge number of persons report low self-esteem, depression. And so if the theory says that in order to accomplish or achieve self-actualization, one's full potential, that we have to have met all those needs. I think that one of the things that happens is we create a spiritual crisis. We create persons who are afraid to step into the next part of life's journey because things are undone. Things are not handled. I'm not going to leave anything. I don't have things paid for. I didn't take care of. And so we need to be thinking about that as well. What is the true meaning of life? What is the true meaning? What is the value of an individual? Is it, and I saw this bumper sticker when I was in high school, so actually one of my coaches on his truck. He who dies with the most toys wins. Now, if that's our mentality, we're probably not going to feel very good about ourselves as we age. But if we think about that differently in that, yes, I've had food. Yes, I've fed and clothed my children. Yes, my children and grandchildren know that I love them. And they always have a place in my heart, in my home, regardless of how many square feet that is. Then isn't that true self-esteem and self-actualization? Okay? And we've gotten so far away from that. And not only are we the people that we are today thinking about materialism, we're going to be older adults still thinking about materialism, thinking that that's success. That that's how I took care of my family because I gave and I did for them. And the other part of it is, unfortunately, that's how we look at a lot of our seniors. Well, what are they doing for us? You think I'm exaggerating? These seniors and their Social Security and their Medicare, they're a burden. We have to get very real about those perceptions, that they're out there. And what we can do to not only help the rest of us, our greater society, but the person themselves. How many older adults do you know that feel like they're a burden? They don't feel like they have any value at all. We don't ask for their wisdom. We don't honor their presence. Unless they have something to give, we don't even pay attention. Erik Erikson also had a stage development theory. And the stage that falls into most adults 65 or older, or as they say here, age 65 through the end of life, is called integrity versus despair. And during this period, people reflect on the life they've lived and come away either with a sense of fulfillment or a great sense of despair over life misspent. Now, we all are articulate and insightful enough to know that sometimes relationships fail, that families and loved ones become estranged, and those things are very difficult. And those are the kinds of things we hope that as we look towards the end of our physical life, that we can make amends, that we can have closure, okay? But if those feelings of despair and feelings of I don't have integrity because I didn't produce, because I didn't save, because I didn't give back enough, We have to change that, don't we? We have to help change that perspective. People who feel proud of their accomplishments will feel a sense of integrity. Successfully completing this phase means looking back with few regrets and a general feeling of satisfaction. These individuals will attain wisdom even when confronting death. I can't tell you how I've seen a trend in my time in practice, especially with persons in long-term care settings, who are not ready to embrace the end of their life. To me, I see it becoming more and more of a problem. And I'm going to be careful not to go on too much of a soapbox here, but spiritually, a lot of people are spiritually bankrupt because their life has been focused on what did I give, what did I do, who did I become, what did I accomplish. And being a mother, and being a grandmother, and being a good person doesn't feel good enough anymore. And that's really sad, isn't it? We all have regrets. We all probably think we could have done something or did something different. But so many times those, I have people saying, well, my family depends on my Social Security. My family depends on the house that I have kept, that we all live in generationally. And so those are the types of things that keep people from letting go, from accepting their own mortality. And this is becoming a trend. Okay? Those who are unsuccessful during this phase will feel that their life has been wasted and will experience many regrets. The individual will be left with feelings of bitterness and despair. It's up to us to say to people, I don't even want to know. I don't even want to ask anybody when I'm doing a person-centered plan of care. I don't care what your education was or your occupation. What do you feel good about? Who do you love? What do you feel connected to? Tell me your story. We have gotten so far away from just talking and listening to each other. I watch my friends with their grandchildren, and it's, what am I buying my grandchildren, or where am I taking them, or what are we doing? And I remember sitting on the porch, endless hours talking to my grandmother, what it was like when she grew up, what it was like when her house burned down, what it was like as I got a little older, what it was like when she lost one of the babies. You can't learn that out of a book. You can't be told that on Jerry Springer. You have to get that. And that sense of family, that sense of that wisdom from our elders, we've got to hang on to it. We've got to cherish it and honor it. No, they can't. Maybe they can't walk, and maybe they can't even control their bowels. But you know what? They have a lot to offer. And we've got to get back to that. Because not only are we going to be spiritually bankrupt, not having that experience, what are they going to leave this world with but a sense of being a burden? And I can't stand that thought. So, what can we do? Well, we can be proactive, we can plan ahead, we can discuss our options. Now we're going to get into a little bit less of Deanna's drama and more into papers. Involve an expert, an elder law attorney, an advocate, clergy, case managers, legal aid, which we talked about earlier. So we're shifting from saying, yes, we understand aging is a challenge. Financially, it's a challenge to maintain our integrity, to be spiritual, to be authentic, to be the person we want. And I've inspired you, I've made you think about that. But the reality is we do have some control, right? And we have to take control, and we have to help other people gain that control. I want a say. I want input into, where am I going to live if I can't live alone? Who's going to help care for me if I can't care for myself? Or if I'm the primary caregiver, or maybe I'm the primary income source for my family, what's going to happen if that's no longer possible? For example, if a person, do you know this? If a person needs to live in a long-term care setting, like a nursing home, their Social Security no longer stays in that household for children, for grandchildren, for expenses. It goes to the facility. All but $60 a month, which is for that person's personal needs. Haircuts, clothes, things like that. Okay? So when a family member who has been at the pivotal point of being a supporter, a contributor, when they're no longer able to be cared for in their home, for example, their income goes with them. And that is a huge issue for a lot of families right now. It unfortunately urges people to sometimes not make very good decisions. There's different levels of long-term care. There's different resources available for those. When I have come to the realization that I'm not going to be in my physical body eternally and not have my voice, my mind, my spirit, might not have the cognitive capacity to say, I don't want this, that. I need to make arrangements. I need to be responsible for those arrangements. The essence of advance directives is saying, what do I want if I'm too ill or hurt to express my wishes? You have some handouts in your folder that are going to be referred to. Advance directives are legal documents that allow you to convey your decisions about end-of-life care ahead of time. They provide a way for you to communicate your wishes to family, friends, and health providers, and to avoid confusion later on if you become ill or incapacitated. But it's never going to happen to me, right? Our parents and our grandparents thought the same thing. Advance directives can also address arrangements for aftercare. Some of us have very, very strong beliefs and values about what's going to happen to my body when I'm no longer in control of it. You know, do I want to be cremated? Do I want a burial? Do I want a service? My grandmother, I remember her saying distinctively, I do not want people looking at me. And so she didn't have that. Advance directives come in different forms. There's something called a living will. A living will tells how you feel about care intended to sustain life. A lot of times when people hear the word will, they automatically think of money. That's not what we're talking about. A living will. Your will to have your needs met. Your will to express your desires and preferences. You can accept or refuse medical care. There are many issues to address, and here's just a couple of them. Would I want to use dialysis, kidney dialysis? And those of you who know much about dialysis, it is a very extensive process. And some folks who've seen it and experienced it have said, I never want that. Some of us realize that you can have that and continue to have a very good quality of life. But each one of us have different values and beliefs based on different experiences. Breathing machines, okay? Some of us say, well, if I need something temporarily, okay, but I don't want to live on it long term. I don't want the machine to keep me alive. If my heart and breathing were to stop, do I want to be resuscitated? And this is oftentimes when you sit down and explain to seniors, especially those who have chronic illness or maybe even are terminally ill at that point, what does it mean to get CPR? Is it like it is on television? Like it is on Days of Our Lives where we come out of the pool and we cough a little bit and we spit out some water and it's all okay? No, it's not. And the reality is it's not always very successful. And we have to have these candid conversations. Tube feedings. What if I can't eat? What if I can't swallow? What if I can't maintain hydration? Do I want that short term? Do I want it long term? What if that is simply prolonging my life? And again, I don't mean to offer any bias, but I think sometimes just how I phrase things is probably you can pick up on some of that. I think too, with myself, I've seen this my whole career. And I've seen things be wonderful for people. I've seen people recover. And then I've seen people who just lingered on and on and on. And you have to wonder, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? But at the same time, it's not for me to say, is it? Who am I to say whether that person has quality of life? Who am I to say that person's not valuable? Organ or tissue donation. Again, a lot of people have very strong feelings about this type of thing. You know, I have the little thing on my driver's license, but is that enough? No. I should have it in my advanced directives too. A lot of people get very passionate, like if they've experienced a certain disease process. Families who are experiencing Alzheimer's disease, for example, are very passionate about this. They want their loved one's brain, for example, to be donated and studied so we can learn more. What we know today is based on what we learned from those donations, okay? But then some of us have very strong feelings the opposite. I want to be intact. God made me this way, and that's how I want to be, that's how I want to leave the world, okay? And that's fine, but you have to say something. You have to let people know. And pain management. Again, when we talk so much about addiction and chemical dependency, which are very real issues, however, we need to understand how people perceive that when it comes to pain management. And I know people who have lived in recovery and they are terrified to take a Vicodin. They go get a tooth pulled and they just take Tylenol and bear with it because they're deathly afraid of becoming addicted. And those are opportunities to listen, first of all. I tend to forget sometimes. I like to listen to what they're saying and why they're saying it, and then help them understand what are their options. And nowadays we have a lot of options that are non-narcotics. So again, the living will, and you have a copy in your handout. A living will is a legal binding, well, I'm sorry, it's a question. Is a living will legally binding on healthcare providers? Answer, yes and no. No, because although 47 states have statutes giving living wills legal force, Michigan does not. So no, it is not a legal document. However, there is a pending decision on living wills, and also, most of the time I can tell you in practice, a living will serve as insight, as a tangible item to say, this is what someone said when they were able to say, okay? So even though it's not a legal document, a lot of times it is considered and honored as an expression of that person's wishes. So is it worth having one if they're not a legal document? Yes. Because all those things I just touched on very briefly probably rose the hair on the back of your neck on some of those issues, didn't they? Probably some of you feel like there's just no way I'm going to ever have that, or you better let me have that, or there's going to be trouble. Some of you can not even imagine, why would you not give a person the care, nutrition, hydration they need for their body to survive? Regardless of what they can say, what they can do, if they even know you're there, that's your belief system. And that's choice. But in the heat of the moment, in the crisis, when we look at cost, when we look at the complications of care, sometimes your family members or you yourself as a family member will be influenced by persons saying, this is futile. We can't do any more for this person. And these are things that are going to help make that decision. The next one is probably one you hear about a lot. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion about. And that's the durable power of attorney. The durable power of attorney for health care is a document that makes your health care proxy known. You designate, you appoint someone to make decisions for you. If I was in a coma, if I had advanced Alzheimer's disease, if I had a stroke and I could not speak, I would want my youngest sister to act on my behalf. I would not want my oldest sister to act on my behalf. I would want my child to act on my behalf. I would not want my spouse to act on my behalf. Vice versa. Any person 18 years of age or older is eligible. They can be appointed And you can have more than one person. A lot of times you'll see adults who say, I want my spouse. You know, we've been together 30, 40, 50, 60 years. We've talked about these things. There's no secrets between us. I trust that even though it would be heartbreaking, they will follow my wishes. Always, always, always have a successor. Because how many times does the caregiver end up being the one that needs the care more than the person they think they're caring for in the end? Spouses often they're the same, you know, they're similar in age and things like that. So a lot of times a spouse can pass, and so we need to have a second advocate listed. It's a good idea, I think it's more than a good idea, to speak with individuals you propose to name as patient advocates. Why? Do you call your daughter on the phone and say, honey, I just made you me and dad's patient advocate, okay? So I need to come sign this. Is that all you do? Is that all you say? No. You want to talk about your thoughts, your values, your intentions. The reason why I say one sister could and one sister couldn't is I have very strong beliefs on certain things like that. I know what I want and I know what I don't want. And I know that one sister could make that decision and the other one couldn't. And it doesn't mean that either one of them don't love me the same. But that's just how they feel. So what powers do I give a patient advocate? I'm giving them the power to consent to treatment or accept treatment, to refuse treatment, to arrange for mental health treatment, home health care, adult daycare, all kinds of services. You can also authorize your patient advocate for gifts of your organs and body and things like that. Will my patient advocate have power to handle my financial affairs? This is where you have to take note. A durable power of attorney for health care does not say, I can sell the house, I can use the money for this or that, okay? You have to have a financial power of attorney. So your patient advocate, which is a word that's used interchangeably for power of attorney, they can make arrangements for your care with your funds, but they cannot handle your property or finances, especially once you've passed. Then it goes to probate court. If you wish for someone to handle your property and financial affairs, should you become incapacitated, you should seek a lawyer's help, and that's just, I'm quoting from a document here, and we know that there's other options, but truthfully, it is a good idea, especially if there's any assets you're concerned about, to help draft a power of attorney for finances or a living trust. And some of you who are more involved in this would say, or both, right? Okay. And again, I'm not here to be a legal expert, but just simply let you know that that is one thing that you would want to consider. And after the presentation, I could talk more about that if you'd like. Deanna, I've heard the term guardian before. Guardian, power of attorney, patient advocate, what's all that? Well, these terms are not interchangeable, and unfortunately people use them. I think a lot of times when we're parents, people throw the word guardian, you know, because it's a child. Well, I'm their guardian. Well, you are, but you're their guardian as far as you have legal standing on them, you're their parent, but you're technically not their legal guardian, okay? And a lot of power of attorneys think that they're guardians, and they're not. A guardian can only be appointed through the process of a hearing in probate court. Guardians are appointed for individuals whom are not able to appoint another person on their own behalf. So I can't say, I want my sister, this sister, not that sister, okay? Because I'm already incapacitated or incompetent. Sometimes we hear that word. And I could go off on a whole big ballywig of how people become incompetent through law and all that. But again, that would take the entire presentation. You're able to make suggestions if you're able to speak and able to contribute, but you're not able to say, yes, no, I don't want that. If a person becomes incapacitated without a power of attorney, a guardianship will many times be sought. So let me explain that. Especially when we talk about healthcare settings. If I'm an individual, and here I am, right in front of you, totally capable, competent, etc. I don't have advance directives. I don't have power of attorney. I don't have a living will. I have nothing because I'm 39 still for a few more days and I'm invincible. And unfortunately, I leave here and something bad happens on my way back to work. Yes, my family will be contacted. Yes, they'll look at my driver's license and say she's got the little heart on there. Okay? But the reality is, once, let's say that I'm in a coma or I'm in a change of cognition, I'm not able to participate any longer. I didn't give anybody the power to make decisions for me, right? So now somebody has to make decisions because I can't do it. So they have to decide, how much medical care am I going to get? Where am I going to live? What's going to happen to my income? Which they don't have to worry about that much because I'm a social worker, I don't have any. But who's going to pay my student loans? All that kind of stuff. And so my family, my friends, etc., all interested parties would need to go through the probate court process, and someone would have to be named a guardian. Because most facilities like nursing homes, hospitals, any type of setting like that, they want someone to make the decision. They don't want 10 family members with 10 different opinions. In fact, a lot of times, if you don't have something in place, a lot of facilities will say, you get that and then come to me, because we don't want to get in the middle of all that. Okay? Now, do people ever get a guardian and they don't want one? Yes. Do people ever wake up from comas or go through rehab, speech therapy, things like that and get better and be able to not have a guardian? Sometimes. But when we're talking about older adults with chronic conditions like Alzheimer's disease, usually once there's a guardian, there's going to be a guardian. Okay? Conservators are the same thing in that you didn't say who we want to manage your finances, your estate, your property, etc. And so being that you cannot, the court appoints someone to do that as well. Typically, guardianships and conservatorships go together. If you're going to be in front of the judge, if you're going to present the neuropsych report, if you're going to talk about, well, this is why I need my sister's money, and this is why my sister doesn't need it, and this is why Deanna would want me to have it. If you're going to go through all that, go through it once and get everything taken care of. Okay? Another thing commonly referred to when we talk about advance directives is the do not resuscitate order. And I brought just 2 forms today for you to look at, knowing this was going to be a small group. And one is what a physician's orders look like for do not resuscitate and some other things. And then I actually brought a Michigan-approved designation of patient advocate form. It's a directions for durable power of attorney for health care. So I actually brought those, and if someone, because I should stay in front of the camera, if someone could jump up here and grab it, that would be good. But I'd like to pass those around while we're discussing this. And also in your packet, you should have a form that looks like this. Okay? Oops, sorry. So a do not resuscitate order or declaration means that I have given a written expression, or my guardian or power of attorney has given a written expression on behalf of myself, that should my heart stop beating and my lungs stop taking and giving out air, that I do not want to be resuscitated. Now, working in hospice, in long-term care, in various settings, you'll see a spectrum of thoughts and values on this from point A to point Z. Well, what if this? Well, no, there is no what ifs, okay? This isn't the what if part. This isn't, well, only for a little, no. This is absolute, okay? If your heart and breathing stop, if you die, do you want to be resuscitated? You can talk about if you're resuscitated and prolonging and machines and what ifs after that. But you have to know, do I want to be resuscitated or not? And oftentimes when I express this to certain persons, I'll say, if I was to come in and enter your room and find that you had stopped breathing and your heart had stopped, would you want me to let that be the end of your life. Let that be the plan. Call your family, call the funeral home, and proceed on with that aspect of your life. Or would you like me to call 911 and start CPR? And then reminding the person of what all CPR includes, because we don't want anybody to make a decision without the right information. And that what usually happens after that, especially in settings, is once that's started, it has to continue on through intubation and all those other things once you're taken to the hospital. If you're in a care setting like a nursing home or a hospital, assisted living, oftentimes that is not just a document in your power of attorney, but it's actually, or a document like this with witnesses, it's actually a physician's order as well. And why is that? Well, a couple reasons. One, the likelihood of that being an occurrence in that setting is high. That's where these things happen. Yes, they happen at home, but they also mostly happen here. Liability. Do you think there's more liability if you do provide care or you don't provide care? If you don't. Which is also why, in most settings, if you do not have a do not resuscitate order, a do not resuscitate document, you will be resuscitated. That is the facility policy in 99.9% of facilities, okay? So those are good things to know for seniors. Again, let's talk about care options. So these advanced directives, these living wills and DPOAs and all that, are they just for people who live in some type of setting that's not their home? No. In fact, that pink form that's coming around, that post, is a form that's used in Jackson County. The whole county uses it. And so it's very common if you're in home care or hospice or other types of in-home programs, respites, waivers, etc., that you'll go into a home of a senior, one or two, and you'll see those on the refrigerator in their home. And that's what the community's actions and education initiatives have tried to do, is let everyone know that they need to have one of those. So we need to have advanced directives if we're home, and or if we're in any of these settings. The other thing that I want to do with this list is just share with you real quick just a brief explanation of what these are, because sometimes people say, well, group home, nursing home, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not, okay? So home is home. Home can be an apartment, home can be in a condo, home could be a house, home could be a room that one rents. Home is home. Oftentimes, seniors will be in apartments with contracted services. They might be in a senior high-rise or, a community, like a condo community that is, very nice and groomed and such, and they have little buttons they can push in their rooms and they can get help, or they can contract with like a home care agency or something like the area agency on aging or things like that. They'll have people that come in and help them. So that's a very common setting that you'll see. Group homes. I'm gonna leave that a little different than adult foster care, because sometimes people use those words interchangeably, don't they? AFCs and group homes, okay? So a lot of times a group home, when I think of a group home and when I use it more clinically, it's a specialized setting. And a lot of times group homes are focused on persons who have special conditions like developmental disabilities or primary mental health diagnoses and things like that. A lot of times group home settings are part of care management through other agencies like community mental health or things like that, okay? So group homes are usually contracted by various community services in alliance to help meet the needs of specialized populations. Adult foster care. Again, sometimes persons with special needs live in adult foster cares as well, but usually there's a little bit less care offered, and so adult foster cares are usually somewhat subsidized based on income, meaning, and or private. I know in the areas that I've worked in, a husband and wife, they might have a big home, they convert it into an adult foster care, they rent out rooms, they offer meals, some light assistance, things like that, and people pay rent, okay? And that's an adult foster care home. And some of them are actually more licensed and provide more care. And again, some are based on income, some are based on Social Security payments and things like that. The home for the aged, and then again, that's a confusing term because a lot of people think that all assisted living is assisted living and that home for the aged is something different. Well, home for the aged is usually the licensure that assisted living facilities have. Technically under our state statutes, assisted living can also be adult foster cares that say that they provide assisted living, but most of the time, assisted livings are licensed as home for the aged. So they have to have certain nutritional guidelines. They have to have certain care guidelines on their medications, on their fire safety, on their food handling, things like that. When you saw in the beginning my little CALD thing by my MSW, Certified Assisted Living Director. So I've been trained and tested so that I can oversee assisted living or home environment facilities based on the regulations that guide them. Okay? And I've managed a couple different sites, which are both dementia-specific facilities. Basic nursing home, again, we have a person who can't be home alone, who needs a significant amount of care with bathing, dressing, grooming, what we often call ADLs. And so they need to live in a setting where there's 24-hour nursing care. Skilled nursing facility, we're going to be the same. It's also a nursing home, but it provides skilled therapy. And I'm going to explain the difference. So most people who are over 65 or persons who are disabled have Medicare. Okay? Medicare pays premiums for short-term skilled care up to 20 days full coverage. So it will pay 100% premium of up to 20 days in a skilled nursing rehabilitation center. After a 3-day hospital stay, and I forgot to put that on the slides, you want to write that in. So after a 3-day hospital stay, a senior that has Medicare or a person with a disability who has Medicare is entitled to up to 20 days, 100% paid of skilled nursing rehabilitation. That is the only housing option covered by Medicare. Did you know that? Okay. So again, when people say, "Well, I'm going to be older adult, I have Medicare," so Medicare is very limited in what it does for you. Custodial care and respite care are not covered by Medicare or even private health insurance. Well, I retired, I have Blue Cross, and I have Medicare. Doesn't cover either one. Okay? And when I say custodial care, I mean a meal, a bath, dressing, toileting, supervising, taking to the store. That's all considered custodial. That's not skilled care. So it's not covered at all by Medicare or private insurance. Well, Deanna, I have long-term care insurance. Or my parents were very wise. You know, they worked for the university, they worked for the state, they were educated people, they planned ahead, they bought long-term care insurance. I'm not here to sell it, and I'm not here to tell you not to buy it, but I'm just going to tell you a couple things that I know. Yep, and we've got 5 minutes, so. Long-term care insurance, prepaid premiums. So when you start paying into it earlier, the payments are lower, but you're going to keep paying longer and longer. Subject to excluding pre-existing conditions. Are they allowed to say, if you have Alzheimer's, don't bother to apply? Yes, they're able to do that. There are limits. If you have it and you meet all the criteria, there's still limits. Once you reach $4,000, $10,000, whatever, $20,000, a lot of them have limits. So there's no guarantee. Once you reach your limit, that's it. Must meet various criteria. So the caregivers, for example, must be certified nurses' aides in order to qualify for reimbursement. The setting must be licensed. It can't just be like an adult foster care or some of those types of things a lot of times. It has to be a certain licensed facility like a home for the aged or nursing home. You often pay an initial deductible prior to eligibility. So after you've paid the first $5,000 or $10,000 of your care, then it kicks in. Payments is often, if not always, in the form of reimbursement. I have long-term care insurance. Great. Mom can go to assisted living. She doesn't have to go to the nursing home because because my long-term care insurance pays for assisted living. You have to pay the $4,000 per month and then get reimbursed under the terms of your policy. Okay? So most facilities, like I said, are not going to accept that unless you're able to pay up front and then be reimbursed later by the policy. It's non-transferable. If I buy it for myself and I pass on, my spouse doesn't get it. So here's some good news about Medicaid. Okay? Medicaid is the means-tested payment assistance. So a lot of times, those of us who don't have private insurance, seniors who are lower income, they may have Medicare, but they still can't afford to pay premiums. They don't have a primary health insurance. They apply for Medicaid. To qualify, the community criteria is somewhat stringent, and it's a significant amount of time and paperwork a person applies at the Department of Human Services. Medicaid will pay for room and board if the person qualifies in some settings, such as basic nursing homes and some group homes. The conditions of these settings sometimes may be less attractive to folks, but this is changing. I can say confidently that in the last few years I've seen that change, where it used to be the beautiful places you see on TV, on the ads, you know, the condo looking, you know, resort places. That's all good and well, but unless you have $6,000 a month, you're not getting in. Okay? And the Medicaid facilities were poor physical plants, old accommodations, things like that. That's changing. I'm just going to try to hurry up and summarize real quick. Medicaid waiver now has a program for people who are financially and medically qualified to meet criteria, that they can live in facilities such as AFCs, home for the aged, or even private homes, and Medicaid will pay supportive services instead of you having to be in a nursing home. But people must be screened and meet certain criteria. The good news, too, is that every person who goes into the nursing home now, even if it's for therapy, is screened to see if they're eligible for that program. And why is that? Why do we want people in the home and community-based services instead of the nursing homes? Anybody? Cost. Cost and choice. I don't know about you, but if I could just have more help at home and I didn't need to go into some other place, I'd rather be at home. So seniors aren't feeling stuck. Okay? Did you also know that the Department of Human Services has a program called Home Help? A lot of people didn't know about that. I didn't know about it until I did an internship there. That people who are on Medicaid but need some assistance with bathing, dressing, things like that, are able to get a couple hours of service. A chore provider, you often hear that term used. But again, you have to go through DHS and get that approved. The good news is you can have a provider of choice. It can be your spouse. Actually, no, wait, it can't be your spouse. It can't be your spouse, but it can be like a child or someone outside the home. Dual eligibles, a lot of times you'll hear that word. That means people who are on both Medicare and Medicaid. And the good news for that is that a lot more programs are opening up and focusing on seniors who are dual eligible because we know that their needs are high. Okay? Newer programs that are coming out, some of you may have heard of something called PACE. It's a program of all-inclusive care for the elderly. And again, very similar to the Medicaid waiver, is it says, we will case manage you. We will help you have services such as ear doctors, eye doctors, dentists, home health aides, nurses, doctors. We will bring the services to you and help you get to the services, sometimes through a PACE clinic, so that you can stay in your home or the environment that you choose to without having to go into the nursing home. Okay? The good thing about PACE is it's becoming more and more common. In fact, the Greater Detroit area has a wonderful program that's expanding. Usually PACE consumers are 55 or older, so that gives you a little more leeway, not the 65. Eligible for nursing facility based on care, so they need help with bathing, dressing, grooming. Live in an area that has a PACE program. Most people on PACE are generally about 80 years old, have at least 8 diagnoses or what we call comorbidities, need help with their ADLs. And again, just FYI, 73% are female. And again, the PACE is coming into this area even more. The other thing that's coming is something called affordable assisted living. Remember I said earlier that unless you have private funds, you don't get assisted living? That's changing, okay? There's a program called affordable assisted living where basically the next area, you rent your apartment, whether it's cash or Section 8 or HUD vouchers, and then PACE provides the services. So they provide, so you're in an affordable assisted living. You rent an apartment in a beautiful facility, and you are able to have your bathing, dressing, all those types of things met through PACE so that you can live in the community independently without having to be in a skilled nursing facility. So again, you can review those options, the different things that are there, nursing homes, palliative care. Let me just tell you that palliative care is the difference between palliative care is, yes, there's no heroics and we're going to allow the disease to progress, but palliative care just means that, comfort care. It doesn't mean we're rushing death or that we're saying, nope, we're not going to keep you comfortable, you're just going to die. It means we've decided that we want to be comfortable, we're not going to get mammograms, we're not going to get cholesterol tests, we're not going to do all those things if we're 90 years old and have dementia. Hospice care is for the end of life, and that has to be when the physician has certified that they're 6 months or less, okay? And all of those options, hospice and palliative care, are available in all of the settings we talked about, nursing homes, home for the aged, home, apartments, etc. So putting it all together as we age, you know, hopefully we become more reflective, we don't have so many natural fears of our own mortality. The problem is, though, we have to learn how to restructure some of our programs because we can't afford the ones that we have. We can't keep going the way we are. You know, we can't stop the aging process, but we can work to be self-determining, accepting it, growing and changing with it. You know, we must communicate with each other, learn from our history, gain perspective, and plan for the future so that we can transcend some of our positive energy to the next generation that are going to be making decisions for us. And one last thing I want to say is it's not only with advanced directives, is it a good idea, is it, you know, self-determining, but it's taking that responsibility, it's taking that burden off your loved ones to say, this is what I want and this is how I want to do it, and then they don't have to decide. And our hope is that we live until we die. So rather than just exist or be a burden, that we've lived a full life. And questions?
Actually, we won't have time for formal questions, but I did want to remind people